Good evening. My name is Amy Novak, and I have the privilege of serving here as the president of Dakota Wesleyan University. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to our campus tonight. I want to begin by thanking Rick and Val Melmer, Lori Oster, and the team at Leadership South Dakota for partnering with us on this exciting evening. We're grateful for the vision of Leadership South Dakota to equip individuals with the confidence and knowledge to impact their communities and strengthen our region. I also want to thank our food service staff, Fresh Ideas, and all the members of our campus community who helped to make this special evening possible. Will you please join me in offering them a round of applause? Tonight we have an incredible group of people with us that share a rich history of service and common roots to Mitchell and the late Senator George Mcgovern. As many of you know, George and Eleanor Mcgovern have had an incredible and long-lasting impact on our campus and are our most notable alums. From their days as students here at Dakota Wesleyan and throughout their time in public service, the Mcgoverns never forgot their roots. To honor their legacy, Dakota Wesleyan opened the Mcgovern Center for Leadership and Public Service on October 2006 to celebrate George and Eleanor's lifelong commitment to humanitarian outreach and civic engagement. Throughout his life, Senator George Mcgovern earned the respect of countless individuals from all political viewpoints and all walks of life. He once remarked, "The highest patriotism is not a blind acceptance of official policy, but a love of one's country deep enough to call her to a higher plane." During a political science course offered on our campus in 2008, Senator Mcgovern opened his remarks to the students by asking the following question: "Tell me about a problem you are most passionate about." And he had a sort of persistent stare and a quiet conviction that led students into a robust discussion of problems that concern the future of their local community, the region, and our world. And at the end of the class, the senator reminded each of the students to never underestimate the potential they had for being a force of change in the world. He reminded them that he too came from humble origins, a small town in South Dakota. They too could be an impact in our world. Today on the campus of Dakota Wesleyan University, a place that has educated 6 U.S. senators and countless other political activists, we continue a mission of developing the next generation of policymakers, thought leaders, and change agents for our world. We remain deeply invested in asking big questions of how an educated population invests itself in communities, both big and small, to create a more vital and vibrant America. We are a place, we believe, where education ought to foster hope and opportunity, while simultaneously encouraging confident and active engagement in the world's most pressing problems. The encounter our students had in that political science classroom, like many the senator had with countless individuals over his life, inspired a generation of leaders whose aim it was to be actively involved in shaping the political, economic, and social fabric of our country. Many of those who followed in his footsteps were inspired that through their actions, individually and collectively, our country could be called to a higher plane of justice, mercy, and commitment to the common good. In anticipation of our event this evening, our moderator, Vernon Brown, was able to share with us a former video from Kelloland by then reporter Jay Trobeck. While we don't know the exact year this story ran, we thought it would be appropriate to play tonight as it gives us a more exclusive look at the 4 Steves. All were raised in Mitchell, graduates of Mitchell High School, Mitchell Colonels, actively engaged in politics, debate, and journalism, and all named Steve. Let's take a look.
Story of 4 career politicians. They're all about the same age, all from Mitchell, all working as spokesmen for Democrats, and all named Steve.
Our paths always seem to collide over and over again.
Steve Kinsella recently left Senator Tom Daschle's office to become press secretary for the Secretary of Agriculture. Steve Hildebrand is working on a mayoral campaign in St. Paul. Steve Erpenbach is the executive director of the South Dakota Democratic Party. And Steve Jarding works for Nebraska Senator Bob Kerrey.
It is perhaps the oddest thing I've ever seen in my life.
These Mitchellites are all veteran Democratic campaigners.
Yeah, we work very closely together. It's kind of strange, and we've kept together through all these times.
All these kids, you know, they were given the idea is the fact that if you don't like something, do something about it.
All 4 are Mitchell High School grads.
They all had things in common. They were all 4 great kids. They had great attitude.
And credit some of their political enthusiasm to another Mitchell alum, the one who ran for president.
I think the Mcgovern influence is probably obvious on all 4 of us.
I remember an appearance, a major rally outside the Corn Palace, and being there and getting the opportunity to shake Mcgovern's hand.
Hildebrand grew up here at 812 East 7th. Erpenbach lived here at 812 East 4th. Kinsella lived a couple blocks down on 5th. Jarding lived a couple blocks away on 3rd. All 4 Steves say it's a geographic coincidence. But 2 years ago, in a tongue-in-cheek editorial, the Mitchell newspaper called it a Democratic conspiracy with roots in Mitchell. And the paper followed up with a cartoon lamenting the plight of a Mitchell couple that wants to name their newborn Steve, except that they are Republican.
It was a good cartoon.
Any truth to it?
They ought to name more of them Steve.
All come from solid Democratic families, except for Erpenbach, who grudgingly admits his mother is a Republican, even though she went to school with George McGovern.
I don't think she voted for Nixon in '72, but if she did, I don't want to know about it.
Jarding's mother used to be a Republican.
And I think she's seen the light in her later years.
The 4 Steves have spread out from Mitchell, but they keep in touch and just might join forces in the future.
There'll be another campaign somewhere down the line where we'll all be in the same office again, I'm sure.
With Eye on Kellerland, I'm Jay Trobeck.
I'd like to introduce the 4 Steves to you. Steve Erpenbach, you want to just raise your hand? Okay, thank you, is no stranger to political leadership and public service. Erpenbach graduated from Mitchell High School in 1980, and after earning his degree from South Dakota State University, he held a multitude of positions with the South Dakota Democratic Party, including state director and co-executive director. He also served as a political director for former U.S. Senator Tom Daschle. Erpenbach currently resides in Sioux Falls and serves as the president for development at the SDSU Foundation. In 2008, he oversaw the university's largest ever fundraising campaign. Steve Hildebrand, a 1980 Mitchell High School graduate, has used his passion for campaign strategy and leadership to assist in both statewide and national political campaigns. He has worked for prominent political figures such as U.S. Senator Tom Daschle, former U.S. Senator Tim Johnson, and former President Barack Obama. His leadership triggered the recognition of national and foreign media as the Washington Post deemed Hildebrand as one of the principal architects in Obama's 2008 presidential campaign. And the Times, a British daily newspaper, hailed Hildebrand as Obama's secret weapon. Hildebrand currently resides in Sioux Falls, owning and operating Josiah's Coffee House and Cafe. Steve Jarding, a 1976 graduate of Mitchell High School and a graduate of the University of South Dakota. He is an American and international educator, lecturer, writer, media trainer, and political consultant. He has worked, lectured, and provided campaign and media training to hundreds of elected officials, candidates, and political parties, as well as to a broad array of organizations and causes worldwide. Jarding has been published in numerous articles nationally and internationally and co-authored the book, Foxes in the Henhouse. Jarding splits his time between Rapid City and Cambridge, Massachusetts, where he has served as a faculty member at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. In 2016, Jarding was voted Teacher of the Year at Harvard's Kennedy School by the student body. His course on campaign management has twice been nominated for the Most Influential Course Award. And Steve Kinsella, a 1975 graduate of Mitchell High School, served as political director and press secretary for former U.S. Senator Tom Daschle. He also worked as press secretary for the United States Secretary of Agriculture and the Minnesota Attorney General during Minnesota's landmark lawsuit against the tobacco industry. Kinsella currently resides in St. Paul, where he serves as a communications and public policy consultant and writer. Kinsella's book, 900 Miles from Nowhere, was named a finalist for the Great Plains Book Award. And tonight, we are also privileged to welcome to the stage as our evening's keynote moderator, Vernon Brown. Brown grew up on a farm between Hetland and Badger, South Dakota. He graduated from Arlington High School in 1986. After completing a journalism degree at the South Dakota State University in 1990, he began a 12-year career as a reporter for KELOLAND TV. In 2002, he started at SDN Communications, where he serves as Vice President of Marketing and Community Relations. Beginning in 2004, Brown has served 8 years on the Sioux Falls City Council, and Brown remains active in the state and community as a volunteer, including a governor's appointment to the 911 Coordination Board and recent chair of the historic Sioux Falls Public Schools $190 million bond vote for a new high school, middle school, and elementary school. Thank you, Vernon, for helping facilitate tonight's conversation. As part of a national interview during his presidential campaign, the late Senator George McGovern remarked, "I still love to go back to Mitchell and wander up and down those streets. It reassures me that there is a place that I know thoroughly, where the roots run deep, a place I call home." Please join me in welcoming home to Mitchell and to Dakota Wesleyan University, the four Steves.
Thank you, Dr. Novak. This is an exciting night. These guys have never sat on a stage together until today. They had a practice run. They had a practice run at Mitchell High School today, which I thought went really well. They asked great questions of these guys. But the list of accomplishments is pretty amazing. Authors, consultants, fundraising, restaurateur, professors, pretty amazing. They're all leaders, and we're excited, and I'm honored to be part of facilitating this discussion tonight. So let's go back in time. Let's think back, late 1960s, early 1970s. Amy set the stage for Mcgovern being one of the things that united you. I want you to tell the audience the stories of your first experience with Mcgovern. And Steve, we're going to start with you on the end there. Should we call them by their last names? Kinsella.
First off, I'm thrilled to be here tonight. This town. Testing. Figures the press secretary can't figure out how to turn on a microphone. First off, I'm thrilled to be here tonight and to be back in Mitchell. Mitchell means a lot to me, and I come back here anytime I can. And I'm thrilled to be part of this Leadership South Dakota forum. It is an organization that I've learned more and more about, and it is so important. It and organizations like it for creating tomorrow's leaders who we desperately need, because we live in a world today that's very troubled. And that world is going to change through those leaders. My first experience with George McGovern was actually kind of unique. It was actually through one of his daughters. It was 1968, and One of his daughters was a close friend of my oldest brother. And I was home one day, and the door knocked, the back door, and I went to the door, and there was this young woman with blonde hair and knee-high fringed hippie boots, because it was 1968. And she said, "Is your brother home?" And I said, "I'm sorry, he's not here." She said, "Okay." And she turned around, and then she turned back around and looked at me, and she said, "Have you ever leafleted?" And I said, "No, I don't know what leafleting is." And she said, "Well, have you ever ridden in a convertible?" And I said, "No, I've never ridden in a convertible." She said, "Tell you what, you come with me, you'll get a ride in a convertible, I'm going to teach you how to leaflet, and then I'll buy you a Coke at the end of the day." So obviously this was before the stranger danger talk took place. And so I walked out of the back door and spent the next 3 hours leafleting in Mitchell. And so it became, that was my introduction to politics. And then later on, which I'm sure we'll talk about, the others will talk about, George Mcgovern's national prominence, really shined lights on Mitchell, South Dakota, and created an awareness for me and others.
Steve Jarding.
Well, first of all, I think the moral of the story is Kinsella can be bought for a Coke.
Or less.
Well, I guess I would go back. It's kind of probably says more about how strange maybe I was as a kid, but I won't go into all the story, but my father died when I was 4 months old, and I was the youngest of 8 kids, and Mom had to raise the 8 kids alone. And it was hard. We went from I think a fairly prosperous family to one that struggled. And as we were growing up, we started to complain about we don't have new clothes, or we don't have new toys, we don't have. And one day my sister Mary, my oldest sister, brought home Bobby Kennedy's book, To Seek Newer Worlds. And she said, "I know you're only 10, but read this book. There are people out there that actually help people. You don't, that want, because we were all, well, we're poor, we don't get this, we don't get that." She said, "No, politics is a good thing. This guy's a U.S. senator, he wants to run for president. Read the book, and you'll see he wants to help all kinds of people. He doesn't care who you are." So I read the book, and I became a huge Bobby Kennedy supporter at 10 years old, 1968. He had a headquarters in Mitchell on Main Street, and I volunteered there, but of course, as we know, on election night in early June in '68 in California, he was assassinated. And I was staying at my uncle's the night that he was shot, and when I got up the next morning, my uncle, who was a Humphrey supporter, said, "I've got some horrible news, Steve." He said, "Senator Kennedy was shot last night and killed." It struck me because it was like, no, this was my hope. Well, if you recall then, of course, George Mcgovern went on at the convention in '68 and essentially took the Bobby Kennedy mantle. And I appreciated that Bobby Kennedy stood for, trying to build wealth in people, give opportunity to people, and give people the chance to expand their horizons, do anything with their minds and their hearts, and they can change the world. And so he became kind of my fixture. That was the guy I wanted to model myself after. That's the guy that I wanted to do good things with. And he didn't disappoint. He didn't disappoint. So there's other stories. I was his paper boy for a while, and I got to meet him a few times, and a fabulous person. But the inspiration that he gave is something that started at a very young age and is still there.
Steve Hildebrand.
So mine is pretty simple. There was a Mcgovern for President rally in front of the Corn Palace, and Mom took a few of us kids down, and I somehow got on the rope line and had a chance to shake his hand and get his autograph in one of his pamphlets, and that was about it. But it sort of hooked you at that point, and I didn't know what I wanted to do at that age. I think I was 9 or 10, and but I knew that we talked a lot about politics and policy over the dinner table, because we also, very similar situation. Dad died when 7 of us, 9 kids, were still at home, and it was really democratic social programs, Pell Grants, student aid, student loans, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, that allowed our family the opportunity to get into the middle class, provided opportunity for us, and it was George Mcgovern as our senator who we kind of watched and paid attention to and cared most about. So,
Steve Erpenbach.
So I was 9 years old back in 1971, and of course Corn Palace Week was always a big thing in September, and so I was remember being downstairs and downtown in the midways, going around, and of course 9 years old, you don't know anything about politics, but I ran across which was the Democratic booth, and had this flyer about Mitchell's own George Mcgovern running for president. And of course never had heard of George Mcgovern before, but got all excited about that. So I remember going home and telling my mom about this. Did you know there's a guy from Mitchell who's running for president? And then so she says, well, I know, I went to high school with George Mcgovern, and I still remember her pulling out the Mitchell High yearbook and showing me her picture, Thelma Tilburg, and then George Mcgovern. And so at that point in time, at 9 years old, you don't know about politics, and you don't know sort of what differentiates you. And I don't recall any kind of a political conversation in my family before that point, but I was hooked at that point based on the fact that I thought a person who could be president of the United States had gone to high school with my mom. And so for that whole year, through 71, 72, I was, if I wasn't at home, my mom knew where I was at, because it was at 4th and Main is where the Democratic headquarters was that year. And I was down there, probably not doing much help to them, but I was always there, because you had Governor Knipe was running for re-election, Jim Abrest was running for the U.S. Senate and won, and then George Mcgovern and running for president. And still remember how cool it was, because my mom gave me the day off of school on election day. So I was going door to door, doing whatever I was told to do, I guess, on election day. And I still think I'm probably the last person on earth who didn't realize that Mcgovern wasn't going to win that night. Because I remember walking home, the dark of night, walking home to my house on East 4th, absolutely convinced George Mcgovern was going to win. And of course, that didn't quite happen that way. But from that time, then I learned a lot about him. But I was just hooked from that minute. And the more I learned about him is sort of where my admiration just continued throughout his life and my life.
We have a lot of younger people in this audience from Leadership South Dakota, and I think maybe the history might be lost on some that this was the epicenter of the Democratic Party right here. Did that create that magic for you at that time, do you think?
Yes, for me, absolutely. I mean, 1968 through 1972, I mean, any of you who lived in Mitchell at that point can remember you'd turn on the evening news and you'd often have reporters doing stand-ups on Main Street of Mitchell, South Dakota. And so, it really, highlighted Mitchell. It highlighted, our famous politician at the time, George Mcgovern. And for a young person who was interested in, trying to create a better world, it really opened up your eyes to politics in America.
I've got a flyer that's I've got hung in my office. Dave Kranz, who was the first one that hired me in a real job, and I worked at the Argus Leader. And Dave Kranz had gotten these copies of flyers from 1960 when John F. Kennedy, running for president, was here. Mcgovern was running at that time as well, and I still have that as a keepsake. But you think about that in terms of a rally at or in front of the Corn Palace with future President John F. Kennedy at that time. I mean, it was a pretty amazing time.
And David Krantz had his time in Mitchell as well, didn't he? The paper here. Beyond politics, I want to talk about something in common that the three of the four of you had that I think also probably played an influence in your life. Erpenbach, or Hildebrand, you touched on it, but three of you lost your fathers at a very young age. How did that influence your family life? You touched on that, but how has it also influenced your politics?
Well, I was by comparison older. I was 13 when my father passed away, and so I was the youngest of five. My brother, who was actually Jarding's age, was then a senior in high school, so he left for college the next year. I went to South Dakota State, and so I was 13 years old, and so we were always my dad had been on disability, and we had I remember when my dad was alive going through a period of time where food stamps and those things were necessary. And they would I remember them going to Randall's Food, because Randall's Food was open late at night. They wanted to shop when it was late at night because they had food stamps. Now, my father passed away, and my mom she worked at Montgomery Ward. She managed the shoe department, which I thought was kind of cool back then. And then she ended up getting a part-time job working weekends at the Bread Cafe. And, but I think, I got through college through, Social Security, survivor benefits, Pell Grants, student loans, heavy on student loans. And, but certainly I've always looked back at that now in my current job, really very mindful of sort of the student, what students need to be able to get through, so in the form of scholarships and other things. But, very thankful for sort of those opportunities, because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have gone, wouldn't have gone to college. And I look at, my life would have been radically different had I not been able to. But I'm very grateful for sort of those opportunities that I did have, and sort of the support that I got from the government at that time.
Jarding, you tell a great story about the family discussion.
Well, yeah, I was telling the story that and my mother came to politics late. My mother was actually Republican in 1972. She thought it would be funny. She gave me a photograph of Richard Nixon for Christmas, and I thought it was funny enough that I put it on my dartboard. And she had a good sense of humor and was okay with that. But no, the story of the importance of the human mind and human spirit, and if you invest in it, you can do anything. And my mom at one point, as we were complaining, and she had a family meeting and said, first of all, had a family meeting, which we had never had, and so it scared us. We thought she was sick, like Dad had been sick. And so we have the family meeting. She's very serious, and she says, before I begin the meeting, I want you to know something. It's critically important that you know this. And again, very serious, and she said, I want you to know I love you. And now we're even more scared, thinking this is very serious. And she said, I love you, but here's what I want to tell you. I don't like you very much. She said, you complain, we don't have new toys, we don't have new clothes, we don't have the life we had when Dad was here. And she told just kind of a simple, today you look back and say it's so obvious, but she said, you guys actually think death is the worst thing that's going to happen to you. It's not the worst thing. Everyone's going to die. You lost a father. I lost a life partner, a husband. She said sickness. You're going to see sickness in life. It's not the worst thing that's going to happen to you. Could be you could make money, lose money, whatever it is. She said none of those are the worst things. She said you all have a life. You determine who you are. You determine what you do with your life. The worst thing, because of that you could do is if on the last day that you breathe air on this earth, you cannot look back and say the world is a better place because you walked upon it. She said it'll be the loneliest day of your life. Now, she believed in an afterlife. She was a Christian and believed in it, but she said, you don't know. What if this is it? So you better go out and quit complaining, take over your life, take charge, and try to leave the world a better place. And she saw in government, Vernon, where she also told the story after Dad died, she got a check in the mail from the Social Security Administration, and she didn't know what it was. So she called or contacted them and said, you sent me a check. I don't know why you sent me a check. I don't know what this is. And they said, no, your husband earned that. You earned that through the Social Security Administration. Take that to raise your children. Help that raise your children. And she told another story when my oldest sister Mary wanted to go to college and was graduating high school and came and said, Mom, I'm going to go to Mount Marty College. And Ma told the story. She said, God, Mary, I've dreaded this day. She said, because I've lied to you. I've hidden this from you. She said, I don't have any money. You can't go to college. And Mary said, I'm not asking for money. I can get a Pell Grant. I can get a student loan. I'm going to college, and the government will pay for it. And my mother came to the realization that government isn't a bad thing, that government can do good things if you let it. And that was the foundation. And that was George Mcgovern, the embodiment of George Mcgovern. So those are life lessons that you see and say, to their memory and to their understanding of the importance of the mind and the spirit to do good things, I think we all owe it to leave something back to give to public service.
Hildebrand, I know your mother played an incredible influence on you. Does every day when you're baking.
There's no doubt that my upbringing shaped my adult years in a pretty dramatic way. My mother grew up over near Kimball, and when she was 6 years old, her mother died, and the 7 kids were without a mother. And fast forward to when she was married and had 9 kids, her husband dies in a construction accident out by the James River, and 7 of the 9 kids are still at home, and we had nothing. And when she was growing up on the farm over by Kimball, she had nothing too. She and her twin sister left the farm at 14 to go work for farm wives and helping them. And basically, you know, they had to raise themselves. Well, my mother absolutely, you know, raised us, but if we wanted something, we knew we had to get a job. You know, so we had the paper route, we had the townhouse cafe. You know, I worked, you know, all throughout, as did my siblings. And if we wanted a new bike, we went and bought a new bike with our own money. If we wanted clothes, we bought our own clothes. We never necessarily felt like we were poor, but we had no money. My mother had no money. She went back to school and got a secretarial degree and went to work full time, but she also had a house to maintain and you know, cars to maintain and everything else, and it didn't go that far. The reason I got into politics and chose the path that I did was because I wanted other people to have the same kind of opportunity that I had. I had the opportunity, as did my siblings, to go to college if that's what we wanted to do. We had the opportunity to work hard and become part of the middle class if that's what we wanted to do. And, you know, as government ebbs and flows, you know, Ronald Reagan comes in to the presidency in 1980, and Social Security survivor benefits change. You know, it starts this war on the poor that's, you know, still in play. And, you know, my passion has always been to, you know, look for ways to get people out of poverty, to look for ways, not through handouts, but to get the poverty industry off the backs of poor people. And that's been my life's passion, and I hope to do it until the day I die.
Steve Kinsella, your story's a little different, but your mother played an incredible influence in your choice of careers as well, right?
Yes, a huge influence. Unlike my close friends here, I was fortunate enough to have a father and a mother growing up and throughout my entire life. My father just passed, who you saw in this video, just passed away this summer at the age of 96. But my mother, Audrey Kinsella, who some of you know, I know the Widmans know, was very influential in my life. She was a very strong, opinionated, independent person. At one time she was interested in a particular issue the city council was debating, and she went down to the couple council meetings and came up to a council member and said, well, you know, I have some questions on this. And the council member said, you know, Audrey, I know your husband, Jack, why don't you send him here to talk to us? And so my mother filed against him and beat him. In the next election, becoming the second woman in the history of South Dakota to be elected to a city council. She became the first woman to chair a city council, and I think the first woman to chair a planning commission for a city. But she taught me my entire life, you know, if I'd complain about something or if I didn't like something that was going on, her mantra was, you know, don't complain, change it. You know, step up and do what you have to do to change it and change it in a way that you want it changed.
Very good. Audience, I'm going to continue with questions, but we do have microphones, and we want you to feel free to jump up at any time and come to the microphone and make this more interactive with your questions as well. While you're thinking of those questions, let's jump into where your political path started to cross. Jarding Kinsella started at USD, correct? Mm-hmm. Share that story.
Well, we were active. Back then, I don't know what it's like today, but there was some political activity on campus, and it seemed to be like different organizations. But I was working. I was editor of the student paper at the university. And I was a sophomore and got an internship in Pierre, which was another George Mcgovern story. Who he essentially got me the internship, and I didn't know him, but he called and said, "I'll do whatever you want." It was very kind, but during that internship, I was offered a job in a gubernatorial campaign, and I knew Steve Kinsella, and we were friends. My sister dated his brother for a while, and his mom played bridge with my mom and Hildebrand's mom. It's just this weird little...
It gets weirder and weirder.
That video was nothing. So we got involved in the campaign, and we stayed in touch, and then Gene Mahan became chair of the party in '86, and Tom Daschle was running for the Senate against Jim Abner, and Gene asked me, I had been Gene's intern in Pierre, asked me to come as executive director. I was in my PhD program. Brenda and I were down in Oklahoma in the PhD program, and so I took a leave and came back to run the executive director of the party. And Kinsella was working for Jim Berg in a congressional race, and Jim's a great guy, and he was running against Tim Johnson. Tim won that primary, and so I saw that there was talent available. I said, Kinsella, we got to have you. And so I brought him in as press secretary of the party, and we had a good year. Tom won the Senate seat, Tim Johnson won the House seat. We picked up 8 legislative seats, and I think Jim Berg won the PUC seat. So so at PUC, so that was there with us too, and then we've crossed paths too. But for Steve and I at USD, there was that connection.
Erpenbach, Hildebrand, how did you cross? And then let's bring it all together.
South Dakota State, the better.
So we graduated from high school in 1980. Didn't hang in the same circles. And then turned out to be both of us on first floor of Benoist Hall as freshmen at SDSU, and so we were very active in 1980. That was a McGovern-Abner race, and so we're involved in Campus Democrats. And still remember election night. We came down to Sioux Falls, working on election day, and again, that was another one. I was kind of oblivious to how bad it was going to be for McGovern, but there was the party that night was for McGovern was. At this place just about a block from the Kello Studios, and it was kind of an auditorium kind of a place, and so we ended up losing that election, obviously, and so I remember it was Hildebrand and I, and then 2 other people driving back, and I was driving back to Brookings, and we stopped before we got on the interstate, stopped at, I think, which was the Howard Johnson, which is where Tom Daschle was having his election night party, and Tom Daschle got reelected to the U.S. House, and first time I'd ever met Tom Daschle, but going through the line and just shook his hand, and so I thought that was kind of ironic that sort of the chapter of sort of Mcgovern, who had been sort of my kind of identity in terms of a political figure for that period of time, gets beat, and then all of a sudden there's Tom Daschle, who really became the future, getting reelected, and so and then after that ended up Hildebrand got me out of. I was working for the Argus Leader. I got offered a job working for Ted Munster. He was the deputy campaign manager. I became the press secretary. Another race, didn't win, and then had an opportunity at the South Dakota Democratic Party, and then I convinced Hildebrand to come back. And so that was really, I think, sort of the time. We did. We actually won that year, so that was actually good.
Let's talk about that noteworthy year, because that really changed the political landscape of South Dakota, right, that year?
It very much did.
This was 1992?
1992. The one thing I would say about the 4 of us that we have in common is that, well, I'd say a couple things. We're all pretty stubborn, we're very tenacious, and we don't like to lose. And when you're in a political battle, you want those characteristics on your team. And the Democratic Party in the state had faltered for a lot of years. Mcgovern sort of, provided the first, real effort from an organizational standpoint, and had successes. And we had successes at the federal level, and with Knipe as governor. But it had been a lot of years. And in 1992, we were invited to run the Democratic Party together. And we kind of put our heads down and said, we're going to put this together in a real way. And we had a lot of people we had to convince to write checks. But, you know, really for the first time, you know, South Dakota Democrats were writing $1,000 checks to the party. We were building a real, true legislative campaign effort. And that year, we won control of the state Senate for the first time in, I think, 16 years. We almost won control of the state House. Dasha was reelected. Bill Clinton came within 3 percentage points of winning South Dakota. We just had a fantastic year, but it was the first time in a very long time where Democrats had power in Pierre. And we played a big part in that, and something we're very proud of.
Was that stubbornness among you ever a problem?
Probably every day.
Ask my wife.
But amongst you?
Don't ask my wife, she's here.
You know, I don't think it was a significant problem. You know, we'd often have disagreements, you know, as to, you know, what we should do
Loud?
and why. You know, I don't think there were, do you remember any loud disagreements?
Jarding and I had a moment that we've never really talked about since then.
Well, this is a great place to do it.
Should we air this in public?
I don't know what you're talking about. I think I know what you're talking about.
So,
If there's more than one, then I'll air the other one.
in 1996, I worked for Bill Clinton's reelection campaign, and I was a diehard Bill Clinton person. We sort of, you know, lived and breathed it in '92, and then I went to work for the reelection in '96. And Jarding had worked for Bob Kerrey, Senator Kerrey out of Nebraska, and the two of us ended up. Senator Kerrey was the chair of the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, and the two of us ended up working there together. And 99% of the time, we stayed out of each other's way, and we got along, and he did his job, and I did my job. And then the impeachment hearings came for Bill Clinton. And Bob Kerrey was, I don't want to say a lone voice, but he was a voice on the Democratic side that was pretty critical of Bill Clinton. And as I grow older, I gain a lot of respect for what Bob Kerrey was doing back then. But you and I had a pretty ugly moment as I was critical of Bob for Senator Kerrey for what he was doing to somebody who I cared tremendously about. And not to say you didn't care about Bill Clinton, but you know, you were right there with Bob Kerrey in a good way.
Well, you have to be. I mean, he's the senator, I'm not. I didn't always agree with Bob Kerrey a lot, and I would voice it in private when I didn't. And but you know, listen, politics is a strange game, and Bob Kerrey is a man of principle, and when he didn't want to vote for the Clinton budget bill, and he was the last vote, we had a drag-out fight that he had to support the president on it. That would have hurt the president. I think it helped elevate the Clinton economy. I later went on to do leadership meetings every week at the White House with President Clinton when I was at the committee, and you'd see the staff. So no, to me, those things happen. I mean, it's the nature. You had somebody that you believed in and were working for. I had somebody, and they had a disagreement. One of the things I learned in politics, and it's tough being on this side because sometimes you want to be on the other side and say, no, it's my opinion matters, is that, you know, there were times where you got to go out and you disagree. We'd fight behind closed doors, and you got to go to the microphone and say, the senator's right on this. Here's why the senator's saying this. And because it's your job. There was a great meeting in Capitol Hill, and Senator Dasher was there, and this was on that vote. The budget bill, and Bob was the last guy. If Bob would have voted the other way, but Senator Kerrey from Nebraska, Clinton would have lost that budget bill, and it was critical to his success as a president. And with it, and Kerrey was wrong, and he'll tell you that today, in even considering to vote against it, but he did, and he almost did. We were in a meeting in the senator's office. Senator Dasher was there. There were 4 or 5 senators, and Senator Kerrey asked me, and we had a very good relationship. Steve, what do you think? And I said, Bob, if you vote against this thing, I think that's the dumbest damn thing you could ever do. And he said, we said, what do you mean dumb? That's not a stupid thing. Here's why I'm doing it. I said, you asked me. And I said, I think it's the dumbest damn thing you could do. It'll hurt the economy, hurt the president. It's just wrong. And we went back at it for a while, and as we're walking out, Senator Daschle's staffer turned to me, or it wasn't Senator Daschle, it was, I don't remember who, but it was one of the staffs for one of the senators turned to me and said, if I ever spoke to my senator that way, he'd fire me. And I looked at her and I said, if I didn't speak to my senator that way, he'd fire me. But the point was, when you leave the room, you have to do it. So, no, I get it and I respect it. And you had to fight for what you had to fight, and I had to defend what I had to defend.
So you guys have all said you're opinionated. You're all clearly good communicators. Why have none of you run? Erpenbach.
Well, except my wife did, because she was more electable, and so she was on the Sioux Falls City Council for 8 years. Part of it, I never really had any aspirations of it. I love being more behind the scenes. I mean, there's something about a thrill of a campaign and the role that I think I play best. But you also, when you work for a candidate and you see what they're subjected to, you know, if people think running, you know, if these candidates and people in elected office, particularly at the federal level, if they think that's a glamorous life, they've got to, they really have to look closer at it. I still remember Senator Daschle talking about, he had been, as we'd come and pick him up at the airport, and he would just come and he was a guy that he ran, he ate well. I mean, he was in really good shape, and was talking about just how beat tired he was. And the analogy he always used says, I always wonder why I'm so tired and everything, and then I look at my luggage, and luggage is just all beat up and everything else. I mean, the types of the hours you got to put in, the grueling schedule and everything else, the sacrifices that people put in to run for office or serve is incredible, and that part is never appealing. And frankly, I don't think I would be very good as a retail politician. I think that's something you really have to be. You have to love going to events where there's a crowd and work a crowd, and I certainly love working with people and have that in my role now, but that's just something I'm not, that's just something that never really appealed to me, but I love being a part of helping somebody who wants to put themselves through that.
Hildebrand, you've toyed with it through the years.
I was very close to running for mayor this last time in Sioux Falls, and you know, you gotta make life choices, and you know, I'm a little hot. I'm a little controversial. I tend to say absolutely what's on my mind and don't put a lot of political calculation behind it. I'm very passionate about what I care about, what I believe in, and I don't know that would have prevented me from running or winning. I have a partner that I've been with for 26 years, and I told him about 3 years ago, he tends to say no much quicker than he says yes. Whether it's, you know, remodeling a kitchen or whatever it is.
Starting a business.
But I went to him about 3 years ago and I said, here's the deal. I know you like to say no, but I'm going to give you 3 things that I want. And I get 2 out of the 3. And I said, I want a motorcycle, I want to get married, and I want to run for mayor. And I said, you can pick the 2. And so I'm not running for mayor.
Jarding, you've toyed with it as well?
I have, and I think you need to if you believe in service, and I certainly believe that of all the forms of service, electoral public service is the most powerful and most dramatic that can change people's lives. There's just no question about it. The governments are the largest businesses in the world, and they've got all the authority to tax and spend and regulate, and there's nothing that comes close to that. So if you really want to serve, that is the ultimate arena. But it comes back to some of the life choices that Brenda and I have talked about it. I think if we would certainly consider it. We know it has to be a team, but that's tough because it just is. I mean, there's one of you who's a candidate, one isn't. But So I don't know that Brenda and I have ruled it out and that we still would consider doing it, because I definitely believe, and I'm young enough, at 61, that I think I could still do it. But I'll be honest, that part of it is South Dakota. I'm a Democrat, and it's the last state in America that has had a change in party in the governor's office. It's been 45 years since we've had a Democratic governor, last state in America. It's hard. It's hard in a one-party state. It's hard to run for federal office. You could raise $2, $3, $4, $5 million. I think I could raise that to run for the U.S. Senate here. But if I had a poll that showed I was close and I had money in the bank, the super PACs will come in and drop $10 million against me, and I can't compete with that. So I tell my clients a lot, and I've run a lot of campaigns, that I won't run a campaign that I don't think I can win. And I've taken campaigns we were supposed to lose. I took Jim Webb's campaign when he was running against George Allen, and people said, this is a pipe dream, this guy can't win. And we ended up winning it. Tim Johnson, I did his last Senate race, #1 target in America. And he had the brain injury, and he came back and heroically did that. But I haven't been able to convince myself I could win in South Dakota. And you normally get one chance. And the flip side is we've done wonderful things, teaching students from all over the world and traveling the world and teaching presidents, prime ministers. That's valuable too, but there's still a part of me that says, no, there's that itch of public service. I'm sad to say that you look at South Dakota and say, if you're a Democrat, it's a one-party state and it's locked. I don't think it's good it wouldn't be good for the state if the numbers were reversed. If all those legislators were Democrat, not Republican, there's something about power when you own it all, the bad things happen. But that's the reality. So I don't know. We'll see.
So when I talked to these three, Kinsella was the last one I visited with, and I asked each of them, who's the most electable if one of you would run? They pointed to Kinsella.
At which time I declined the invitation to appear here. I've thought a couple times about running for office. I've been encouraged to run for office. Of all of us, I live in the place where a Democrat can get elected, St. Paul, Minnesota, which the Republicans refer to as the People's Republic of St. Paul. And, I got into this business starting at the age of 11 because I wanted to create a better world. I wanted to participate in public service to create a better place. And to Steve Erpenbach's point, the lifestyle that you have to endure as a politician, can inhibit that. The time that you have to spend raising dollars to be competitive in this world that is super infused with dollars, the time you have to spend compromising. I'm hard-headed. I don't always like to compromise. And so, doing what I do to affect public policy, I'm able to achieve what my goal was all along, was to, create a better world and a better community and a better state. And you don't, necessarily have to be in public office to affect change. Steve Hildebrand is a shining example of that. The work that he's done to combat predatory lenders in South Dakota, the work that he's doing in the schools right now the work that he's doing in the schools right now to help support students who are economically disadvantaged in Sioux Falls is remarkable. Now, as an elected official, he may not be able to do that as effectively as he is doing it now.
I want to remind you there's a microphone that's looking really lonely out there, so please come up and ask your questions. I want to go back and touch on something that Jarding talked about with one-party rule. 92 was kind of a high watermark for Democrats in South Dakota. What went wrong? Erpenbach.
I don't know. I think you saw at that time we had, the two U.S. senators in terms of Senator Daschle and Senator Johnson. Certainly numbers in the legislature. I don't know. There's certainly been some demographic shifts. We talked about this a little bit earlier. We just, I think we're having a beer when I think the question was asked. In terms of certainly some demographic shifts have taken place. I think that in terms of our ability to recruit really strong candidates in some places has been a challenge for us. Financially, I think there's been a different kind of a competitive disadvantage for us, and I think it just kind of got away from us. I look at sort of the, so 2004 is when I left, when Senator Daschle left, and have thrilled with the career I've been able to have since that time. But when you think about what happened in that election and sort of the influence that Tom had for a lot of people for a long time, all of a sudden to be gone, just left such a huge void that we just have not been able to fill. And we've had people like Stephanie Herseth-Sandlin, who's a tremendous, served and a tremendous candidate. Billy Sutton, I thought, ran an amazing campaign for governor this last time. Very compelling story, and fell just a little bit short. But I've had friends that have asked me, they're going to run for the state legislature, and you'll look at certain legislative districts, and I hate to say it, but there are some people that it's hard for me to encourage them when I look at the voter registration disadvantage that they're at, and I wonder if they really want to subject themselves to that. And I wish I didn't have to say that. I wish I could be encouraging and feel that they could overcome it. But I just think that the numbers in some districts are just so decided. It doesn't matter the quality of the candidate. I think if they've got a D behind their name, I think they're not going to win.
But I think,
Stop shutting that off.
but I think it's a big shift that it changed from '94 to where we're at today is that Republicans had a solid ability when they own peer to be able to redistrict the boundaries in this state to whatever the hell they want. And that is not how a congressional district in a larger state or legislative districts in any state should happen. They should be done by bipartisan commissions or by courts or some level of fairness, but you shouldn't park all of your votes in districts in a way that isn't fair to whatever political party you're in. You have to. A big reason why we can't win legislative seats is because of those boundaries, not because there aren't Democrats in the state and independents who will align with the Democratic Party. So until that changes, it's going to be incredibly difficult to ever gain power in Pierre again.
Jarding, there was not good news in the Democratic Party this week. How do you turn that around?
We actually were talking about, I was talking about it with Sheldon. It's not good news, but politics is a strange animal. I vividly remember when Richard Nixon resigned after he was impeached, and it was a cover of Newsweek magazine said, "Is the Republican Party dead?" 6 years later, they had the Reagan Revolution, right? People's memory of these things tend to be short. My advice to the Democratic Party today is clean it up, take care of the issues, and start afresh. You can do that. This isn't something that needs to drag on. This is something that can be cleaned up rather quickly. I think politics is more about personality than it is about institutions, or that it is about a process in many ways. Find good people, have a good message, go to the people of South Dakota and tell them what you can do for them. Be honest with them. We're last in the nation in wages. We're first in the nation in people that have to have multiple jobs. We're near the bottom in teacher pay, even though we did adjust it a couple of years ago. It's a great state. Brenda and I moved back here 13 years ago by choice. We wanted to be here after 18 years in Washington. But we have to be honest with who we are. You look at what's happening to the farming industry, and yet, take the politics out of it. I think that whoever the new head of the Democratic Party is, if Randy stays with it or somebody else, I would say come to the people of South Dakota and say, we got a new party. We're transparent, we're open in the books, but the biggest issue then is, what are you going to do? What are you going to do for the people of South Dakota? What are you going to do when South Dakota students lead the nation in the amount of student debt that they have? We're number 1 in the nation. We're better than that. We have great, SDSU, my God, Mr. Dykhoff's here, I met him. We have Lions that have done such great things, but we got to make it easier. We're down to 1 out of 4 high school kids in America graduates from college, largely due to tuition rising 1,800% since 1978. We got to come and tell people we're going to invest in you again. When we invest in people, America does great things. We have done it forever, and that's my advice to the party. Don't let this drag you down. Clean house, be transparent, start fresh, but go to the people and tell them what you're going to do for them.
You sound like the new state party chair.
Kinsella, we can't leave the stage tonight without talking about the tone of politics today. Compare what you see in Washington, D.C. today to your experience in D.C. and tone and personality.
You know, it has changed so much, tragically so. And Steve Jarding, I'm sure will agree. When I worked for Tom Daschle in the United States Senate, when I worked for Mike Espy, the Secretary of Agriculture in the Clinton administration, I mean, we would have conversations with Republicans. I mean, Republicans would come into the office after hours and sit down with Tom Daschle, and, you know, they'd, you know, talk about their differences, they'd work out their differences, and, you know, they would fight on the floor, but they respected each other. And you did not have the hostility that exists today. You did not have the poisonous attitudes that the two parties have toward each other right now. And so, I mean, it's changed tremendously. Today, you know, they don't speak to each other. I have friends who work in Washington still who tell me, you're so lucky you're not here any longer because the atmosphere is so poisonous.
Erpenbach, how do we change that?
Well, after 9/11 and Senator Daschle and Senator Lott, and we had Senator Lott, Senator Daschle's papers are at South Dakota State University, and he has a thing called Daschle Dialogues. And the first guest he ever had was Trent Lott, who was the Republican leader in the Senate at the time. And so we opened that show with a better video than you showed, quite frankly. But we opened that show with a video of where everyone from Congress went out and they wanted to make a statement that after 9/11, basically saying that the government was going to be open, trying to show this kind of a unified front. And then they broke out, I think they sang God Bless America. And so you think of that moment, and of course that dissipated at some point in time, but you think that sort of the unity that was shown there in terms of people, and it was completely spontaneous in terms of somebody doing it. And then you think about if we had a horrific event like that today, would that occur? Would that same kind of a spirit of sort of uniting people regardless of party to do something like that the symbolism and everything that sort of that the nation would need, and I'm not so sure it would exist. I mean, when you've got comments about a president who refers to people as low life and human scum and those sorts of things. I mean, the tone is awful, but you just wonder, is there ever going to be a moment like that? If after 9/11, that kind of a moment couldn't just jolt us out of what we're all about and the fact that we are here to work together, and if that fades that quickly, you just wonder, can we ever get that back? But it's hard to watch, frankly.
Hildebrand, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think if we're going to sit on our hands and keep our mouths shut, nothing's ever going to change. You know, we're allowing John Thune and Mike Rounds and Dusty Johnson to be silent. You know, we should demand more, and I would say that if it was 3 Democrats in there, if they're going to be silent and allow things to happen that make us less than proud Americans, then the fault is ours. You know, if we're going to just sit here and, you know, I had a good friend and Democrat come into my office, or come into my restaurant the other day, and I made a comment about John Thune, and his comment back was, John Thune's a really nice guy. Well, I don't care if a politician is a nice guy or a nice woman. I want politicians who are effective, who get things done on behalf of the American people, period. Define that how you want. But virtually everybody in Washington right now, they're working for the destruction of our country. And you can argue that one party is better than the other if you want, but right now we're not solving any problems. We're creating incredible problems for the future of this country. Here in America, abroad, to our climate, to everything that we all care so deeply about. And we're sitting here talking about the past instead of the future. And if all of us care, whether it's the people in this room or the people across America, we better start doing something about it. And it's demanding better from your public officials. Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. We gotta start demanding better. And when you go back and you look at the US Senate and how it was run under Bob Dole and Tom Daschle, that was a model. They had their partisan fights, but at the end of the day, those two did what they believed was best for the country, and they worked together to solve problems. And that doesn't exist anymore. And we as American people are as to blame as anybody else because we aren't doing anything to change it. And until we do, it's going to get worse and worse and worse.
Jarding?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things. Some we've talked about. We should have redistricting not done by state legislative bodies because they're going to cheat. It's human nature, whichever party's in control. But a couple things. One, we have to convince people that government's not bad. I don't know where this came from.
You talked in the public radio interview the other day about government should be inspirational. Today, and I want to talk more about the students you see, but do kids see government as an inspirational or aspirational career?
No, not like they should. I think they're less cynical than people my age. That we were taught that somehow government was bad. I mean, government was bad. I went to 10 years of college. I wouldn't have gone to one day of college if I didn't have student loans. Couldn't have done it. I mean, my mom couldn't have raised kids without, those aren't welfare programs. Those are investment programs. The country has made so much money off me because my income was elevated because I got an education. I paid my student loans back with interest and they are taxing me and I am happy to pay taxes. I'm okay with it because it builds our country. So we have to somehow change our mindset. If we keep saying government's bad and the greatest representative democracy in the world, we're going to get what we wish for. And that's not very good democracy. And you could argue we're already there. The Congress and Senate was in session 94 days last year officially. 94 days. That's nuts. I don't care who's in charge. Look at what else is going on. Look at what else. In 2001, lobbyists spent $25 million a month to lobby Congress, and there were 16,000 of them in Washington. 25 million, 16,000. 2 months ago, it went over 600 million a month, not 25 million, and there's 46,000 lobbyists in Washington. Money is destroying our democracy, and we either figure it out, and we either think it matters, and we quit letting super PACs and Citizens United and all this crap, or we're going to get what we paid for.
There might be some Republicans in the office that say you guys contributed to that.
To some extent, of course we have. You play by the rules. I'm not blaming. The truth of the matter is, we're sitting here as Democrats. Want to know the truth? I hate both parties. Get rid of political parties. They are destructive. It's not an accident the founders did not have political parties in the Constitution because they feared them. That's the problem. It goes back to what Hildebrand said. If we don't figure out a way to start to work together with what's going on, from income inequality to jobs, we now have 39% of all jobs in America automated. In 10 years, it's going to be 50%. What are we going to do with those folks when they can't earn a living? What's our tax base going to be? How are we going to build roads with that? We better figure it out. And yet the world is hurtling down the path from global warming to income inequality to automation to you name it. And yet we can't work together. And there's something wrong with that. We are better than that as a nation, and we better start acting like it.
Kinsella, and then we have a question from the audience.
I just wanted to add one point, and Steve Hildebrand, Steve Erpenbach touched on this a bit. As a Democrat, I naturally disagree with most of President Trump's policies. But what bothers me more about him, and I've talked to lots of my Republican friends who agree, the president's, in addition to policy and everything else, the president's supposed to be a leader. And the president's supposed to do two very important things. One, work as a unifier of the American people. George Bush did that. Both George Bushes Barack Obama did that, and others. Unfortunately, Donald Trump's stock and trade is to pit Americans against each other. And as long as that happens, the tone will never change. And then the second thing is tone. You know, when you see his tweets, you know, where he references the young climate change advocate from Sweden, when he, you know, demeans her and criticizes her, you know, when he makes fun of a disabled journalist, when he uses demeaning terms to describe women and body shaming, that is not the tone we should have in America, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, and it makes it very difficult as a parent and as a community leader when I tell my kids that it's improper to bully, you know, and then they watch bullying via a tweet machine, you know, it makes it very difficult in America today.
Go ahead. Tell us your name first, please.
My name's Liz, and I did want to say this is so cool. I really enjoy listening to you guys. As a matter of fact, I could listen for hours, your stories of the past. But part to Steve, I was going to say, but to Hildebrand's comment, I'm also very curious about what you'd recommend with your experience for the future. You know, looking to not even talk about the Republicans, but from a Democrat standpoint, from looking at, let's just narrow it to the presidential candidates. Somebody that I'm trying to figure out, when do I really start engaging, because there's so many people, and quite frankly, in my mind, there's a few that stand out that I think are electable, but I also think the people that are not getting on the debates have a lot to say, particularly Steve Bullock from Montana, and you know, he's fought so much by keeping the big money out. How do people without the support of that huge money, the super PACs, get a voice in today's politics? Thanks.
You touched on a lot of things. The Democratic debates, I think, are absolutely ridiculous. I think the Democratic Party and CNN have done a lot to hurt, not help. They shouldn't decide who gets to play. If you're a candidate, you're in. You know, if you're Steve Bullock and you're governor of Montana, you're a very credible candidate and you have every right to be in there, and it shouldn't matter how much money you've raised or not raised. Part of the advantage of being in those debates is your ability to do well and raise a lot of money as a result. And the Democratic National Committee should not be making decisions about which filed Democratic Party candidates get to run. A huge bone of contention that I have with the DNC is that they allow Bernie Sanders, an independent, to play as a Democrat and run in our primary, but they don't even make him register as a Democrat. Yet a registered Democrat who is governor of Montana doesn't get to participate in the debate. So I have a big problem with that. Related to when should you engage, the minute a candidate gains your interest and your trust and your passion, get behind them, help them, fund them, volunteer for them, you know, be passionate about it. Don't wait for them to rise in the polls or whatever the case is. You know, groundswell of support if that's who you're passionate about. I'll switch it up just slightly, and I want to touch on public service because there's a lot of people in this room from the Leadership South Dakota effort that may never run for public office, but they have a passionate about making a difference. And, you know, I've chosen my path, and it might not be the same path that somebody else wants to take, but it is my path. And I want each of you to figure out what your path should be. You know, you've made the decision to go through this tremendous effort with Rick Melmer to go through this Leadership South Dakota program, but figure out what you want to do with what you are learning and what you are gaining as a result of that. Now, I'll give you a couple examples of two things that I think are just really super cool that I heard about this week. So I'm trying to start this nonprofit on my own, and it's gained some press in Sioux Falls, and so I got phone calls from 2 separate and distinct people this week who told me what they're trying to do, and they asked if I could give them any advice on how to create bigger and better efforts. So one of them, he said his organization is called Sleep in Heavenly Peace. I've never heard of it before. He said there's 200 chapters across the country, and what this nonprofit does is volunteers build beds, single beds and bunk beds for kids who don't have beds. And they invite donors to contribute money, and when they get that money, they ask the donors then to come in and help build the beds, and then they ask the donors to go to the homes or the apartments or whatever and help deliver the beds. And he's got Lowe's Corporation in Sioux Falls ready to do a 50 to 100 person build or bed build. And what he doesn't have, and the reason he was calling me, is he doesn't know who needs the beds. And he wants help to figure out where to get these beds. Well, if you're a kid growing up in poverty and you don't have a bed to sleep in, or you're sleeping with your parents, or you're sleeping on the couch, or you're sleeping on the floor, chances are you're not getting a good night's sleep, and your self-esteem is probably lacking as you're, maybe all the other kids at school are sleeping in a bed. So when you go to school that next day, you're tired, you're not feeling great about who you are, and you're probably not going to learn as effectively. So what he is doing and what his volunteers are doing, to me, is critically important to providing a better life for these kids. The other one called me, and he sees a great need in Sioux Falls to help elderly poor who are still in their homes but don't have the capacity to mow their lawn, rake their leaves, and he said most importantly to shovel their sidewalks or their driveways. And he said the lawn and the leaves are less important, but immediately the city is going to find people who don't shovel. And he said, I need a large contingency of volunteers to help me go take care of these elderly. And he said, I need help figuring out how to get this done. Well, to me, those are 2 incredibly good ideas of public service. And that's what I want to tell the Leadership South Dakota team, is to figure out what drives you, what is your passion, and then to go figure out how to make a difference. Because it doesn't mean you have to run for public office to make a difference. It doesn't mean you have to, slog it out in a political campaign to gain power. When you make a difference in the lives of people, that's leadership. And that's what I really want to encourage all of you to do, is to figure out what your passion is and to find what the need is and to go fulfill that need. And take some leadership, because there's a lot of people that need your help, whether it's people suffering from cancer or dying from heart disease, or whether it's poverty or any other issue. There's a lot at stake in our community, in our state, in our nation, in our world, and you can make a difference. But you got to get off the couch, you got to put the remote down, you got to decide that you're going to put some energy behind something that's important, that's going to help other people, and then you've achieved leadership, in my opinion.
Erpenbach, you all have lots of time left on this earth. What do you want to continue to accomplish, and what would you tell the young people in the room looking for that passion?
Well, it's hard to top. What Hildebrand has done is, it was probably 2-3 weeks ago, he put this on Facebook in terms of Lowell Elementary in Sioux Falls, and looked at the high percentage of free and reduced lunch and just the profound need that was there. And as we're driving over today, he's talking about, in a couple of weeks, $67,000 has come in, and he's doing everything from field trips to coats to all sorts of things, the sort of the need that exists. Look at Kinsella, who the other thing we have in common is, so we both have teenage sons, or we both have sons that were named Jack, that were diagnosed type 1 diabetic. Both of them very much smarter than their dads, both of them thriving at Big Ten institutions. But he's working in Minneapolis on something about affordability of insulin. You know, I serve on the board of Feeding South Dakota, incredibly fulfilling when you think of the sort of the food insecurity issues, and you look at places like Sioux Falls. It's hard to hear the stories about sort of the number of kids that predominantly the kids that don't have access to food on a regular basis, and you know that they can't be, if they're going to school and they're hungry, you know that they're not going to have the kind of experience you want them to be having in an educational setting like that. And you know, when the chapter closed in 2004, when Senator Daschle lost, you know, in some respects, I mean, that's still a day that, and a time where it's really tough to sort of think back to that. But I also look at sort of the new chapter that started, the opportunity I had with the South Dakota State University Foundation, which is basically finding people who are philanthropic, people who want to make a difference, whether they're alums, whether they're businesses, or whether they're just friends of the university, and the profound difference that they can make in people's lives in terms of students that are people that want to access a higher education, but they can't afford it. Our president, President Barry Dunn, is an enrolled member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe, and talks about his mom was Native American, his dad was a white rancher, grew up in the Rosebud, and when he became president, one of the things that his initiative was, it was called the Wikini Initiative. Wikini is Lakota for new beginning. And he talked about we can't change the past in terms of what's happened with the American Indian population in South Dakota, but he said we can do something going forward. So he has committed resources that the university has had, and we have had millions of dollars that have been directed for trying to help students, American Indian students, and provide that gap so they can pursue a higher education at South Dakota State University, and is also building an American Indian Student Center to really give them a sense of place and make them feel comfortable in a campus that is still predominantly white. So I really sort of look at the opportunities out there, and I would echo what Hildebrand said about in terms of Leadership South Dakota. I just, you know, the amount of time that employers give their employees to be a part of this program, to take multiple days off every month, and to be able to see the things that they get to see around the state and create those networks. Amazing things are going to happen for it. So whether that's people pursuing elected office, or they just find boards or other nonprofits or other ways that they can help, good things are going to happen. I still think there's a need for people to run. We still need really good stateswomen, in everything from city council to the state legislature to federal office. But when you think about public service, there are so many ways that you can help and make a difference. And I think you've got to find where your passion is, and pursue that to the fullest extent, and you're going to see the difference that you can make.
Kinsella, you work on issues every day. What are you passionate about in the rest of your career, and how would you advise young people to get involved?
I'm passionate about lots of issues that I'm engaged in and that I work on. But I've found myself drifting to a point where I spend more and more time becoming a teacher, teaching others how to organize, how to be better communicators, to positively affect their communities. And I work with causes that are trying to implement T21 laws to restrict youth access to tobacco. I'm working with an organization, ad hoc organization, as Steve Erpenbach mentioned, of type 1 parents and type 1 diabetics, to create an emergency insulin fund to save the lives of people, type 1 diabetics, who run out of insulin and don't have the money to afford it. But in working with these people, I tell them all the time, it's not rocket science. I mean, if it was rocket science, I wouldn't be doing it, because I don't do rocket science well, if at all. But you give these people these skills, and then they can go out and do it themselves. And that's part of what the earlier question, how do you counter the money in the system? And one of the ways you counter the money in the system is by not only voting, but also becoming an active participant in a democracy. because, as Steve Jarding pointed out on the public radio interview yesterday, active participation in democracy, that is the huge check for the money in the system right now. And so, the graduates of Leadership South Dakota, go out there, get engaged in your communities, follow your passion, impact the world in a positive way on the issues that are important to you. But beyond that, you have additional skills and become the teacher in your communities, become the teacher in your states to, build this movement to positively affect change.
And we have a question, but Jarding, I want to finish with this line of thought. You're teaching democracy around the world. Is that your passion going forward?
Well, it's one of them. I mean, I do believe in it. I've been fortunate enough. I've had several hundred students. I teach to graduate level, or I taught at graduate level at Harvard, and a couple thousand students over the last 16 years, and several hundred have run for office and gotten elected. I have a couple of students, president and prime minister. I've got something like 9 or 10 or 11 running for president and prime minister now. I take great pride in that. It doesn't mean they'll all be successful, but they learned leadership skills. They learned what it means. They learned the responsibility to give back. They learned that public service isn't about those who serve, it's about those who would be served. And you have to understand that to be a good public servant. They understand that politics is merely a vehicle to get across the finish line, that once you're there and you have title and power, you can change the world. You can do right. You may have to play by rules. I hate the rules of politics, the money, the negativity, but they're the rules. And so I got to play by them until I get to a position to change them. So, no, I don't think Brenda and I have ruled anything out that we would do. I think teaching is always an option. The training that we're doing, elective office is a possibility. Again, I don't know where that would be. I'm not sure it could be here. I wish it could be. But I guess I would come back to, and I agree with what everybody said. Listen, service is service, and the Leadership South Dakota team, God love you, keep doing what you're doing. But please don't rule out elective public service. I use the example, and I'll finish on this and go to the question. I taught these courses on campaign management, leadership, and media training at Harvard, and I had an American kid come to me after one of the semesters, and he said, "Professor, I took your classes, I loved them, you inspired me, I think I'm going to run for office," but he said, "I'm still torn, something eats at me." He said, what would be wrong if I just went out and made $100 billion like Bill and Melinda Gates and gave it all away to charity? And I said, well, first of all, I love Bill and Melinda Gates. I served for a time on their foundation board, and I love that they're giving all their wealth to humanity. But I said, there's two problems with your theory. I said, the first problem is you're never going to be Bill Gates. I'm sorry, but the odds that you create the next great widget that makes you $100 billion is probably not going to happen. But I said, the second problem is, do you know how quickly, and he was an American kid, do you know how quickly the United States government spends $100 billion, both on and off budget? And he said, I have no idea. And I said, well, I do, about 3 days. And I said, so you can spend a 50-year working career, and please do the stuff that you're doing. But I said, if you rule out elective public service, you can spend 50 years, make $100 billion if you're lucky enough to be the next Bill Gates, and over 50 years make that, or you go to Congress and vote on that every 3 days. And if you have the right morals and values and you want to better the world and you understand service, you can change the world in a country like the United States of America. That, to me, is why elective public service is so important. When good people don't run, there's a void, and that void tends to get filled with people who don't care as deeply about America or our democracy.
Very good. We've got a brave soul here.
Hello, hello again, Steves. This is my second time today, so you're doing something right. It's interesting. I'm Bryn Palmer. I'm a senior at the high school here in town, and I was just curious. Steve Jarding touched on it earlier about kind of student loans, student debt. What role do you guys think the government has in? Because as I'm looking at colleges, I just completed my FAFSA form. What role do you think the government has in student loans and stuff like that?
Well, I'll answer because I brought up. First of all, I saw that the Trump student loan director resigned today, saying that the student loan program, the $1.5 trillion debt, is horrendous, and it is. But I'm torn. If the government gets out of the student loan business, I'm afraid who will fill that void, okay? The government's not doing a very good job, but I'm still afraid who will fill the void. That's number one. But number two, I believe education in America is a right, not a privilege. I think we should give it to everybody as far as they can go. We gave free education to 3.2 million veterans after the Second World War, and within a generation, we led the world in everything. We got that money back in so many times over, and it's generational. Studies show that if you go to college and get a degree, your kid's more likely to get it. We paid for that. Best investment we ever made. I don't know Warren Buffett, okay, I've met him, but I'm not name dropping. I happened to be at an event and he was there, and I asked a stupid question. I said, Mr. Buffett, if you could make one investment, what would it be? Just one investment, what would it be the best investment? He didn't think about it, he didn't, whatever. He didn't say, oh, I bought Dairy Queen because they have, they sell hot dogs and have good ice cream, which is why he said he bought Dairy Queen. He said, oh, it's real easy. He said, I'd give a free education to everybody. But the way I do it, he said, I'd go to the federal government and say, wherever you stop educating somebody, where they can't afford it or whatever, I'm going to pick up the cost of their education. He said, if I could afford to do it, and you probably can, I'm going to pick up the cost. But the difference is, you get to tax them back at the education level you took them to. So if Steve Jarding, who needed a student loan to go to college or couldn't have gone to college, now with a high school degree, it can only make X is whatever. But with 10 years of college, I can go on with a couple degrees and make, hundreds of thousands of dollars, whatever it is, over this period. Mr. Buffett said, I couldn't count my money. He said, I would have so much money that initial investment is nothing. Get every kid in this country the education where they can get to their level of ability. And I said, well, what if a kid screws up and drops? He said, then they drop out. I'll take that risk. But I want a kid who otherwise would have a high school degree to now have a PhD in changing the world. And by the way, the tax system will benefit because he or she's making a tremendous income now, and I can tax them back at 33%, and I am making a killing. And he said, that's the best investment I could make. The best thing that I could do, please, if we want to continue to be great, you go to Europe today. In Germany, you get a free education. In fact, if you're an American, you could go to Germany today and they'll give you a free college education. They understand the power. You know where they learned it? From us. And the world is doing it. In India, where I work, cheap universities. Anywhere that I go, in Africa, they're getting it, even though they've got work to do. The idea of an education to boost a society, there's nothing more powerful. And so whether the federal government should be involved, to me, they should be involved by saying, we'll pay for it, we'll tax it back later.
Erpenbach, you live this world every day.
Well, I mean, it's a motivator in terms of how do people access a higher education. And there are times President Dunn tells a story about a young student, was an American Indian student. They were trying to help figure out what resources to get in, and they were working, and there was like a $2,000 or $3,000 gap for this young man. And he said, for that kid, it could have been $30,000. I mean, there was just no way for him to overcome it. And you just think of the lost potential. And you think of, we have at South Dakota State probably in that 25 to 30% of the incoming freshmen that we have every year are first in their family, first in the generation college students. So that means they come with probably they don't have the kind of family support that's going to come and help them. So they're going to be reliant on whether it's Pell Grants, scholarships, whether it's academic or whether it's need-based, and hopefully less reliant on student loans. Because when we look at when you create teachers, or you create people who go into professions that maybe don't pay that much, but you can't overestimate. I mean, just can't overstate how important they are for our society. The last thing you want to do is have an elementary teacher who is saddled with a lot of student loan debt. So that's really what motivates the work we do in terms of working with people who are philanthropic, who want to provide that opportunity for students. And that's frankly the most rewarding part of our job, is seeing students that have an opportunity, because there are generous donors around the world, frankly, that are providing scholarships that make that possible.
We have one last question, and then we're going to finish this up. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Paula Jensen. I'm a class of 2016 Leadership South Dakota graduate. And my question is for each of you. If you could pick just one topic or one issue that would advance the state of South Dakota, what would it be?
Good question.
All right, I went first. Getting people out of poverty. You know, if you look at how to create a tax base to fund your government, you want more people paying more taxes, okay? So if you have people living in poverty, they're paying very little taxes because they have no money to spend, okay? When we did the payday lending campaign back in 2006, 2008, I argued with people with the Chamber of Commerce and said, payday lending is bad for South Dakota because almost every single dime goes to out-of-state corporations who are parking their businesses here and charging 578% interest. And so why would you want poor people to be saddled with that kind of debt that is simply being shipped out of this state? Instead, let's get rid of those and figure out how to keep their money local and have them not be saddled with so much debt, because you can't get out of poverty if you're in a cycle of debt. I argued with people in the chamber in 2006 about raising the minimum wage. And every credible study about the minimum wage that is done across this country says if you put more money in the pockets of low-income people, they spend it locally, it's kept here locally, and it cycles through the economy, and local business people are the ones that benefit, okay? So if you look at a cycle of poverty, if you look at kids in an elementary school who come from nothing, and if you want to keep them in nothing, that is only going to saddle your state with problems. Higher crime, a lesser workforce, healthcare problems that we're going to pay for, not them, on and on and on. So the fewer people you have in poverty, the better your state's going to be. And so in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, how shameful is it that 50% of school-age kids qualify for federal poverty assistance? When you look around Sioux Falls, it looks like a very rich community. As long as you're south of 22nd Street, you're just north of it, right, Vernon?
Yes.
Just barely.
Just north.
But I think Sioux Falls is a great example of haves and have-nots. You've got a whole bunch of elementary schools that have 80% or more, up to 100% of students who qualify for federal poverty assistance. They live in a pocket that most people in Sioux Falls don't see, okay? They don't get away from their neighborhoods. They don't get the same learning experience as kids in better off schools do. And so if you want to fix problems in our state, then let's get more people out of poverty. Let's reduce the poverty levels dramatically. And whether it's in Sioux Falls or Mitchell or the Indian reservations or wherever you are, the more people out of poverty, the better the state's going to be at every single measure.
I don't know if SDSU winning the Dakota marker from North Dakota State, does that qualify?
Yeah.
That would be awesome. It'll happen Saturday. Frankly, I think I would just look at the status of our nine American Indian reservations in South Dakota in terms of just the abject poverty that exists, and I think the sort of the hopelessness that exists, and that permeates into gang activity and drug problems and everything else, and so many people have tried and for so long. But I think that would be one of the, and Governor Mickelson made a real effort in terms of the reconciliation efforts, and efforts have been made, but it is such a profound problem. But I think if I look at that, I born and raised here, and absolutely love being a part of this state. But I think that's the one thing that if I could wave the magic wand, and certainly would agree with Hildebrand's as well, but I think if you could do something that frankly gave the people living on our 9 Indian reservations more hope and more opportunity, I think that would be probably my wish.
Jarding?
I mean, these are hard to top, right? I mean, there's so many people that are hurting, but I think for me it would be, some sort of a contract with South Dakota's young people, and the contract would be, we're going to make sure you get a good education. We're going to make sure that if you're hungry, we're going to feed you. You're going to get a school lunch program if you need it. If you need health care, we're going to provide it. We owe that to you. We're going to give you a college education as far as you can go, and then we're going to cut you free. And then that's our investment in you. And hopefully for that investment, you're going to want to give something back, that you're going to be appreciative for what we did. I think the biggest sin in a country this wealthy and in a state as great as South Dakota is, and it is a great state, is that we neglect our young people. We don't invest in them. We somehow think they're going to find their own way, and they won't. They just don't. There's too many pressures. There's too much going on. I think we ought to do it in America, but the question is, what would we do in South Dakota? If I could say if you're a young couple and you want to raise a family, raise them here, but I can't necessarily guarantee it for you. You're going to come here for whatever reason will bring you, whatever employment, but I'm going to guarantee your kid. I'm going to invest in your kid, and I'm going to give that kid every tool to succeed, so that when he or she leaves Dakota Wesleyan University or wherever it is, they are going to be able to change the world, because they've never had to want at the most basic needs in life. If we did that, we'd have a really, really good state, and I would try that.
Kinsella, look over that border and tell us what we need.
Yeah, exactly. Just what you need, a Minnesotan telling you what to do. I agree with Steve Hildebrand. I've worked in and around programs that deal with nutrition, programs that deal with health, and there's an old saying that one is only as good as the whole. And when you have a significant population in a state that lives in poverty and is dealing with all the negative aspects associated with poverty, including on the state's Native American reservations, it impacts the quality of the state. It impacts the state's future. And so, the more that you can do to help to lift people out of poverty, which George Mcgovern recognized. I mean, it was one of his, key issues that he worked on, feeding people and helping pull people out of poverty, because he recognized that, the whole is only as, or we as a state or we as a nation are only as good as the whole. And so that would definitely be a priority.
We owe a few thank yous tonight. First of all, Rick and Val Melmer, where are they? Over here. And Lori Oster. Stand up, Lori. Connie Donahue. Where's Connie? Connie's in the back there. And Dr. Novak. What a great venue, what a great campus. Thank you for hosting here tonight. And finally, these gentlemen have done so much good. They do good still every day. And I think, thank you for your time, for investing and listening to them tonight, but we owe them a great deal of thank you as well. Thank you. Good job. Well done.
Remain standing if you would, but I'd just like to say a couple things. I want to reiterate what Vernon said about our friends at Dakota Wesleyan, Amy, Emily, Jan, so many folks that made this happen. Thank you for a wonderful venue and a wonderful job of hosting. We have a few board members that I'd love to just recognize very quickly. I think they're all kind of sitting in this general area. We have Paula Jensen, who actually asked one of the questions, Ron Miller, Dana Dykehouse, who's been a terrific supporter of Leadership South Dakota, so thank you, Dana, for being here, and Paul Cheddar. Where's Paul? Paul's right over here. So 4 of our board members are with us tonight. would you join me in thanking them for their support and their leadership in our program? So thank you very much.
Do you want to mention their books?
Yeah, go ahead.
Also, if you'd like to learn more, we have two of our authors here, Foxes in the Hen House, Steve Jarding's book, still available on Amazon. When did you write this?
It came out in 2006.
Okay. And 900 Miles from Nowhere, Steve Kinsella.
Yep. Great. Finally, we heard someone told us that it's going to get cold this winter. I don't know where that came from, but we have some Leadership South Dakota blankets that we want to give the four Steves as a token of our appreciation. And my wife Valerie is actually the brainchild behind all of this. She's a 1979 graduate of Mitchell High School, and she was the one that turned me on to this idea that, Rick, we've got all these guys, all named Steve. They all graduated around the time that I left Mitchell High School. And so without her, this doesn't happen tonight. So thanks to Valerie for her willingness to get these folks plugged in. So, yeah. And thanks to all of you for coming. So many of you made a long journey to get here. Safe travels home. Thank you for your investment in Leadership South Dakota and Dakota Wesleyan. And Vernon, thank you for your leadership tonight.
My pleasure.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.